Okay, Tiffany says I am on audio right now. So as you may have had a chance to just glance through these slides, there's quite a bit of information in tonight's presentation. And a lot of it is, examples. I put in a lot of different examples. And I'm not going to bore you all by reading what is on the slides with the examples. I hope that you'll go back and look at them yourself and maybe get some ideas and inspiration from them. But I will touch on the main points around that. But the cover letter seems to be one of the things that challenges a lot of NCRW candidates the most. Many times we'll see a really strong resume and it looks like maybe we have a winner. And then the cover letter comes along. And the cover letter just really does tend to reveal weaknesses either with formatting or sentence structure, grammar, punctuation. If there's any weaknesses, they always seem to come to light with a lot of light shine on them when it comes to the cover letter. The other thing about cover letters, though, too, I went back and I pulled out all the samples that you each sent me at the beginning of the class and looked at the different styles and formats. And, you've probably heard many discussions within the industry about how important is the cover letter? Do we still include it? Do we still do it as a professional business correspondence? Seems like a lot of job search is taking place online now. A lot of employers are asking the candidates to email the resume. What do you do with a cover letter in that regard? So there's a whole lot of things to take into consideration. But for the purpose of this class and in preparation for the NCRW, I'm going to cover primarily the formal business cover letter format, the one that's been around for the longest. Because if you can write a strong letter and format a letter well in that format, then it's very easy for you to go back and modify it for each individual situation. But if you're trying to write a very condensed one up front, it may not work for every situation. So when you do the certification exam, part of the exam is going to be to actually write a formal cover letter like we're going to cover tonight. So we're going to talk, initially about the purpose and what some of the common weaknesses are that we're seeing in the cover letters. Talk a little bit about the different formats of the cover letters, who you're writing to, what you're writing about. The business correspondence formatting, and I'll hit the highlights of that, but when you're formatting the cover letter, the most important thing is that you really turn your attention to the Gregg Reference Manual, because that's where you're going to get the best formatting tips and techniques, and I will point out the main things that you want to pay attention to. And then we're going to go back and we're going to look at that principle that I introduced way back in the beginning, the AIDA, the marketing principle that drives all marketing documents, that the goal is to grab attention, to incite interest, to create desire, and then inspire action. So you want that to happen with your cover letter just like you want it to happen with the resume. And then, some various techniques for closing the cover letter. I'm going to touch on some of the things like how to handle the salary inquiries, look at a little bit of the difference between an e-note, job board cover letter, and the full business letter correspondence. Got a few tips for you when you're writing to recruiters, because it's going to be a little bit different than when you're writing for a job. Same thing, some tips on writing networking letters, and then an overall approach for how to tackle the cover letter. And, of course, as you can probably already guess, that's going to be next week's homework assignment, is to now develop a cover letter for Candace now that will complement the resume that you're sending. So I'll be sending you out a sample job announcement that would be the type of position that she'd be targeting, and and you'll have the next week to actually develop the cover letter for that. So I gave you a bunch of different samples. Obviously, there are many, many, many different types of cover letters and different samples that we can look at. So I tried to grab some that were kind of general to represent the various tips that I'm covering. So starting with the AIDA principle, like I said, you want to start, first of all, by capturing attention. And we grade that pretty heavily when we're looking at the NCRW samples and the test. For the longest time, cover letters started with that very, I'm writing to express an interest in, or I'm submitting my resume for. So what we are really looking for is a very attention-grabbing opening statement, something that's going to pique interest, that's going to distinguish the candidate and is going to, incite the employer to want to take the time to read the rest of the resume. So that opening sentence is so critical in the cover letter. Then you want to, generate interest, and you're going to do that by addressing the employer's needs and giving examples of how the client satisfied the employer's needs. The cover letter should not be a litany of what's in the resume. Too many cover letters seem to be written as if the job seeker is saying to the employer, in case you're too lazy to read my resume or you don't understand what it says, let me tell you what's in it. The cover letter needs to reveal things that are not obvious from reading the resume. The cover letter is the one opportunity for the client to really reveal their personality and their communication style. It's not as rigid as the resume, and it's written in full sentences, so you're not getting those very concise, telegraphic writing in a cover letter. So you want to speak as if you're a real human being speaking on behalf of the client. You want to cultivate desire, and you do that by giving the employer a reason to call the client. And the reason is going to be because the letter has illustrated that the client understands what the employer's pain points are, and they're prepared to address them. It's not because the client says, I'm really wonderful, and here's all the awesome things that I did. But it's being able to reveal that the client is understanding what the employer needs. And that is a real biggie, that whole issue of being written from the employer's perspective, not from the client. And then the final step of that principle is to inspire action. So you want to ask for the interview. You want to tell the employer how to reach the candidate. You want to tell them the best way to reach them, the best time to reach them. You don't want to just trail off with, thank you for your consideration, unless all you really wanted was for the employer to read the letter and give it consideration. So we look for a proactive ending to the letter. What do we want to happen next, and who's going to be taking that next step? So when we look at different resumes, formats, I gave you a sample here for one that I think I named it failing cover letter or not a poor cover letter strategy. So if you look at this Joseph DeMarco, this one shows a lot of the things that are cover letter weaknesses. So part of it is the format in itself. There's many different formats of business correspondence. And if you look in the Gregg Reference Manual, you're going to see each of those listed. But the one that we adhere to is the full block-style business letter format. That's the easiest one to set up because everything is flush left. There's no date on the right like there is on Joseph DeMarco's. There's no indented paragraphs. It's just everything is on the left margin, everything is straight down, and there's actual numbers of line spacing between each category that are very clearly specified in the Gregg Reference Manual. So you want to make sure that what you're doing is following the full block style business letter format. And you'll see the guidelines as well as some examples in the Gregg Reference Manual. Another problem is the letterhead, the margin, and the font size don't match the resume. And I know back in the old days when I was writing cover letters, back in the 80s and early 90s, there was never that attention paid to a client's letterhead. As a matter of fact, we used the old business letter format where the top of the letter was the client's address, and then that was followed by the company address, and then it went from there. So we've transitioned beyond that. And because of marketing and branding, the client's letterhead is equivalent to a company letterhead. And if a company were putting out marketing materials, marketing correspondence, they would put it on the same letterhead, and they would set it up the same. So when you're writing your letters for all of your clients, the first thing that you want to do is set the margins on the new document to be the same margin size as they are on the resume, choose the same font style, and copy and paste the letterhead from your resume onto the new document. Now, depending on the font size that you were using, you might want to bump it up if the letter is short. So if you're using, say, a 10-point Calibri in the resume, it would be acceptable to go to an 11-point Calibri. It would not be acceptable, though, to switch over to a 10-point Arial or some other font. So you want to set it up so that it looks the same. Another weakness that we see is the letter's not centered vertically. And if you look at Joseph DeMarco's, that's a good example of what I mean. There's too much white space at the bottom of the letter. The letter is all appearing at the top of the sheet of the paper. So that means you've got to be a little more creative with your formatting. You've got to be a little more creative with your content to get that letter centered vertically. And again, I direct you to the Gregg Reference Manual because there's a whole section on what do you do when the letter is too short, what do you do when the letter is too long. And it gives step-by-step examples of how you can adjust the letter so that it is centered vertically on the page. Now, the problem is these letters that aren't addressed to a specific company or a person. And, of course, we get a lot of, pushback from clients on that. Gee, I don't know who the person is. It didn't say in the ad. Well, there's many, many ways we can figure out who to address the letter to. Probably the most simple being pick up the telephone and make a phone call. If all else fails, then you can use a generic greeting, dear hiring manager, dear recruiter. But it should never be the first line of defense. You always want to go that extra step to try to find out who you're writing to. As I said earlier, the opening statement is very bland. The paragraph's very trite. It fails to grab attention. It uses those tried and true statements. Now, I've seen another strategy used, and I saw it in one of the samples from the class, sometimes in the beginning of the letter, sometimes later on in the letter. And that's where the writer asks the employer a question. Now, I can't point to anything that says that's grammatically incorrect, but my feeling is if you're posing a question in the letter, are you really expecting an answer? And wonder if the answer that is in the employer's mind is, no, that isn't what I'm looking for. Then I don't know. I personally have an issue with starting out with, are you looking for A? Because it's just, to me, not a good way to grab attention. We'll just leave it at that. And then, as I said, quite often the letters will restate what's in the resume, sometimes even verbatim. I've seen, I've graded samples, and test where the writer took a sentence right out of the resume and put it in the cover letter word for word. It's guaranteed to give you a failing grade. Other weaknesses that show up, they don't mirror the employer's language. You want to use the same words that the employer is using. So when we look at writing the letter, and we get to this 4-step approach, it's identifying not only what are the key words the employer has in the job announcement, but what's the overall tone of the job ad. Many times you can evaluate an ad and you can get a feel about the culture of the company. If it's a very formally written job ad, the cover letter itself may need to be a little bit more formal. But sometimes you see some of the language that, can be humorous, can be upbeat, can be high energy. You want to reflect that style as you're writing the letter. As I say, the focus oftentimes is on the candidate. It's not on the employer. And a good way for us to judge that is we look at how often the letter includes the words I, me, and my, or I am. Because as soon as you start loading your sentences up with that terminology, you're writing about the candidate. You're not writing about what the candidate has to offer. And then the grammatical errors. And as I said initially, this is where, the rubber hits the road. If you're having problems with grammar and punctuation, or you're not a meticulous proofreader, it's going to show up in the cover letter even faster than it would in the resume. So you really, really need to pay attention to grammar, punctuation, proofreading, editing. The whole 9 yards really comes to light in the cover letter. Of course, I love my little graphic there with Gene Wilder, who at the time was still with us. So, cover other weaknesses, large blocks of text. Look at your letter when you're done. If you've got blocks of text, paragraphs that are running 5, 6, 7 lines of text, not sentences, but actual lines of text, you need to go in there and edit. You need to break it up a little bit more. On the other hand, you don't want to have each sentence on a line by itself, so that you only have a series of maybe 2-line statements repeated over and over again. Then it's a little too concise. Many times the tone's rigid. It lacks warmth and personality. The sentences, they're not written with rhythm and flow. So as I said earlier, this is where you get to reveal the candidate's personality. Go back before you write next week's homework assignment and read the way Candace is describing herself and see if you can capture that person. That, feisty woman who survives in a men's working environment. That person who's able to build relationships. That person who loves communicating and interacting with people. You want to catch that personality in the letter, not a very rigid letter or a letter that's using terminology that wouldn't be part of her normal language. Close by requesting the interview. Always request the interview. It doesn't have to be the last sentence, but it needs to be at the end of the paragraph that the client is requesting an interview. Always provide direction on how to reach the candidate. Yes, it's in the letterhead, but it may not be clear. Direction could be something like, please phone me after work hours as when I'm at work, I give full attention to my job. Or it's okay to call me as late as 10 o'clock at night. Or, please call me between the hours of noon and 1 o'clock when I'm on lunch break. Anything that will inspire action and help the employer know how are they going to go about reaching the candidate. And then call attention to the enclosed resume. You can do it at the beginning. You can do it in the body. You can do it at the end of the cover letter. But somewhere you want to reference that the resume is enclosed. And also note that this is the one time you're typing the word resume, so you need to get the accent marks in there. And you'll want to go back to that earlier lesson we had about grammar and punctuation and the little tip sheet I gave you on how to create those accent marks, because we're always looking for them when we're grading these. So, as I mentioned, we've got different types of cover letters. The one that you'll be writing for your homework assignment, and if you go on to do the NCRW, the one you'll be writing is in response to an actual job opening. So if you're submitting a sample for the initial step of NCRW and you submit a sample resume and cover letter, try to submit one that's in response to a job opening. We won't count you wrong if it's for a recruiter or a networking letter, but there is a little bit of a difference between those three different styles. And then really there's two basic formats. There's the formal business correspondence, which is the one we're talking about this evening, and then there's the electronic correspondence. And that can either be an e-note where the resume is attached and the email message is taking the place of the actual cover letter. There might be a job board letter where the client either uploads to an online job posting, or they may be asked to copy and paste a letter into a text box. And in those cases, you're going to find that usually the number of characters has been limited. And then there's the online application. So job board is a little bit more of the generic. I'm going to upload my resume to Indeed or Monster. I don't know who the employer is. I can't really write to their needs specifically. And then the online application where the client does know the job they're applying to and they do know the employer. So I'm just going to touch on those, rather quickly. So business letter formatting, most of this I've already told you about, margins, fonts, letterhead. Keep your letter to one page. I think I got at least one or two samples from the class that were 2 pages letters. Keep it to one. And, although you may have a lot to say, we want to be concise. We want to respect the employer's time. Keep it to one page. Keep it centered. Here I've got centered horizontally. Before I said vertically. I need to go back and change one of these. But I'm meaning center it in the middle of the sheet of paper. Looks like it was a proofreading oversight from one of my proofreaders. Okay, format in the full block style. So they say I don't want to read to you everything that you can read yourself because it could be a very long and boring evening then, and maybe we'll even get done a little bit earlier tonight. So the things that are required, you have to have an inside date line, you have to have an inside address, the salutation or the greeting, and then you've got the message body, you've got that complimentary closing, that's the line like, sincerely or with regards, and then the signature block. And, of course, the signature block doesn't make sense if you're submitting it electronically, but we still ask you to set it up in that format so that we know that you know how to set it up that way. And then there's the optional sections, that attention line, where you're writing to a particular company, and then in the address line you may put attention and the individual that you're writing to. The subject line, the reference line, that would be regarding, and then it might have the job title, the job order number. There seems to be a little discrepancy about whether that goes above the greeting or below the greeting. I don't think we really count it off one way or the other. If you look at the Gregg Reference Manual, I think they suggest that the regarding line go between the greeting and the opening paragraph. I tend to like it above the greeting. The Joseph DeMarco one, it was centered. That would not be marked as incorrect. But you'll notice on some of the other examples that I gave you, the regarding subject line is above the greeting. And then the enclosure notation, which certainly, if you are enclosing the resume, there should be a notation under the signature that indicates that the resume is enclosed. And there's different ways that you can do that. So these are just some of the basics here then on the formatting. Things that you really want to pay attention to. For the date line, you always spell out the month, never abbreviate it on the cover letter. It's okay to abbreviate it on the resume, but not on the cover letter. Write out the days and figures. Foul the date with a comma and then put the year. So you can see clearly there the first example is the only acceptable example. You spell out the full month, put the day, the comma, and then the year. The others are not acceptable. Then when it comes to the inside address, these are the basic requirements. If you don't have the name and you're starting with the company name, that's perfectly fine. You could also switch it, do company name, and then attention, Mr. Arthur Smith, and his title could be on the same line or could be on the next line below that. The street address, you always want to spell that out. Abbreviations are not acceptable there. And then the city, state, and zip code. Now, when it comes to the state, you want to reflect whatever format you used in the letterhead. So if you spelled out the state in the letterhead, spell it out on the inside address. Don't abbreviate city names. And then if you are using the abbreviation for the state, always use the 2 capital letters, no punctuation, just standard postal regulations now. Okay, and then the formatting requirements, you've got your salutation. A mistake we see quite frequently, and I see it here in the Joseph DeMarco, your greeting is always followed by a colon. Not a semicolon, not a comma, it's always a colon. This is one of the rare times that you absolutely must use a colon, and nothing else is acceptable. You can abbreviate the titles, follow the title with the last name of the individual, and then the colon. Now, the Gregg Reference Manual does also have some tips on how you might handle letters if they're being written to more than one individual. But usually with our cover letters, it's not like we're addressing them to a couple. It may come into play, for example, if we're helping the client write a thank you letter after an interview, and they may be writing to more than one individual to thank them for the group interview that they had. Then when we get to the closing, the one blank line, capitalize only the first word. So if you're going to close with sincerely yours or best regards, it's just the first word that's capitalized. Put a comma at the end, and then down 3 blocks, type the client's name. And all of this is also specified in the Gregg Reference Manual. The enclosure notation then, there's just a couple of different options there. Like the complimentary closing, you only capitalize the first word. You can just, put enclosure, resume enclosure, 1 enclosure. You can list the number of enclosures. You can say 2-page resume, anything to just bring attention to the fact that there are documents that are enclosed with the correspondence. Because you may also be submitting a reference list, letters of reference, an application. It's going to depend on what the employer is asking for in the job announcement. So that's the overview on format. Let me just stop and see if anybody has any questions, because I did see a lot of different formats come across with the samples that I received at the beginning of the class. So let me just unmute the line. If you've got background noise, remember just *6, and I'll just see if anybody has any questions or comments about the actual format of the letter. Couldn't remember. Okay. Christina, did you get to join us yet?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, did you have any questions or comments about formatting?
Just to make sure I understand, is full block style when it's justified on both the right and left margins, or only left?
That was a good question. Thank you for asking that. No, full block style is always justified on the left. And
Okay.
there is a confusion there because full justify style means the left and the right are straight to the margin.
Okay, that's what I thought, so I wasn't sure. Okay.
Yeah. You want to mirror what you do in your resume. So if your resume is fully justified, meaning your font ends at the left and the right margin, straight lines, then you'll do that same thing with your letter. But full block style just means all the lines of text start on the left margin. Nothing's indented.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question, though. Thank you for making that distinction. How about Brenda?
Question on the signature block. Is it acceptable to change, once you have your signature block there, is it acceptable to change to a handwritten font to type it in as though someone had signed it?
It's a strategy that people are using. Are you saying, is it acceptable in terms of NCRW?
Yes.
Yeah, it's acceptable because we recognize that there's no way you're going to be able to sign it and then send it to us as an electronic document. So, yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, e-signature is what you're putting on there then. How about you, Doug?
For enclosure, that specifically would be a mailed letter, right? Not an attachment in an emailed.
Yes and no, I guess. I mean, you can't enclose it if you're attaching it. You would be attaching it. So I would say for the purpose of the certification exam, go with the most formal, which is enclosure.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because, again, what we're trying to find out is, do you know the straight and forward way to do this so that you're okay diverting from that? But, yeah, I mean, if you were going to put it on a job board, you'd probably delete that. Upload it with this application or with this correspondence as my resume and application.
Okay.
But, yeah, you're fine on that. And then who else did I have? Mark, I don't know if you get on the line or not. No, Mark. How about Ronnie?
No, I guess as I'm looking at my Greg's reference manual, I guess I'm looking the techniques and the format for the letters, memos, and emails is what you're referring to. Right.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And actually, since one of the formats, I think I have it here in the slides, but Ronnie used what's called a T-bar format, which is also an acceptable full block style, and that's where the body of the resume is divided into two columns, and the left column is showing what the employer is asking for, and the right column is showing what the client's offering. And that is an acceptable strategy for cover letters. And if I don't have an example in here, I'll pull one up and show you what I'm talking about when we get to that. But that was a nice technique, Ronnie. Thank you for reminding me of that one, too. And then Suzanne? Okay. And Tiffany Roberts?
I'm good, thank you.
You're good? Yep. And I don't think Tiffany Betting got on the... Oh, LJ. You know why?
I'm
I
good.
almost missed you, LJ. I didn't have a sample cover letter from you, and I was just flipping through my sample cover letters.
No,
and
but that's
Sheila. Oh, I cut you off, LJ. What were you going to say?
That's the point, though. I've actually never written a cover letter, and in my role wearing a recruiter hat, I very rarely ever read them.
You're one of those people that keeps us on our toes. Yep. You know, the industry constantly is doing surveys, and it seems as though it still always comes out to 50% of people say they read them and 50% say they don't. So, you know, I always go for the least common denominator. It's better to have one and have them not read it than have them looking for it and you didn't submit it. Yep. But that's very common, LJ. You're right. And now we're going to test you to see how far you can go with creating one.
I know. It's going to be a challenge.
And then Sheila, I don't know if you got on. Did you get on, Sheila? Okay. So let me just put you guys on mute again. This is the fun part. Oh yeah, and the Gregg Reference Manual. I was going to start to look that up. It's section 1307 is where you're going to want to start on the Gregg Reference Manual. You know, I remember back in the old days trying to type letters, and you know, you had to actually count the number of spaces and center in the middle of the typewriter, and if you got to the bottom of the letter and you had another sentence and you ran out of room, then you had to pull it out and type the letter all over again. So really formatting should not be so much of an issue anymore because we really have that ability to manipulate the document. So just kind of run through some of these quickie things then on that first part, grabbing attention. That, you know, first paragraph, ignite interest, make the client come alive. So as I said, I won't read all of these examples, but here's a lot of really great strategies for capturing attention. That first sentence, there's so many ways you can do it. So you can promise a benefit. You know, this is what I did, and now I'm prepared to do the same for you. You can identify a need. Show that you understand the employer, or you understand the industry, or you understand the market. Bring out something, you may be able to reflect on what's happening in the economy, maybe in the political arena. Maybe you could just show a sensitivity to the challenge that the employer is facing, that your candidate is ready to address. So think about identifying a need. You can illustrate some insight into the company or the industry, which is a little bit like identifying the need, but just calling out right away, this is what I have learned about your company. And, you know, I understand what went into you being able to do that, and I can continue to deliver those kinds of results for you. Another one is breaking it down. You know, start out with some really strong numbers that represent what your client did in a previous position and how they're prepared to deliver the same results for the employer. Something, as I say, the idea is to try to capture their attention. Quotations is a real nice one, particularly if you can get something that reflects the client's personality and the style. You can make it become the first sentence of your first paragraph. I've also seen it effectively put in a text box at the top of the not at the top, but in the regarding section of the cover letter. I've seen it centered. So, you know, as you have here with Joseph DeMarco, he's got the centered vice president, the regarding statement. But having a quotation to open the letter is really a nice, effective strategy. So, as I say, it can be a quote from someone speaking about the client, or it can be a quote that represents the client's philosophy. Tell a story. Hey, you know, depending on your client's personality and the style, their communication style, they may be able to give a little bit of a background about who they are and what motivated them. You know, when I talk with clients, particularly college students, I'll ask them, why did you get into this line of work? I cover that a lot when I'm doing interview coaching, that burning question, why did you decide to major in that topic? Why did you decide to pursue this career? So when you have a minute, read this little anecdote, because that was actually a client that I worked with who told me that story. This is who I am, she told me. This is what made me decide to go down this career path. And it's a great way to grab attention and to make a connection with the employer. Much more interesting than, your job posting interested me because. So it's speaking from the client's heart. Talk about your passions, your dreams, your goals. Again, it's somewhat tied to the profession and why they're doing what it is they do. So, this one is talking a little bit more about their philosophy about sales and how they approach it. So revealing that. And all of these examples that I'm giving you are all ways to start the cover letter. Many times when I read a cover letter, there will be a good example like this, but it's like the second or the third paragraph of the cover letter. So it's very easy to just grab that and bring it right up front and have it be the opening sentence instead of opening with that very trite. Turn them around. Sometimes I see them, they're the second sentence in the first paragraph. Just flip it around, and you're going to get a lot more attention grabbing that way and impact. And then this other is just a good example of saying it in 200 characters or less. Reducing cost to increase profits. That's what I do, and I do it better than anybody else. Much more interesting than a lot of the individual statements that we see. And again, this came right from a client. She said it in her own words. They called her the margin maker. Her brain doesn't think any other way. So again, bring the client's personality into the opening. And then the example that I gave you here, the words that are in bold, I am not suggesting that you bold these words in the cover letter. I put them in bold because I wanted you to be able to see these are actual words that are in the job announcement. So this is a very good way to mirror what the employer is saying by using the same words that the employer is using. It's very clear then that this is not a generic cover letter that was written for each, written once and sent to every job. So as you identify the key words in the job announcement, you may be able to weave them into the opening statement of your cover letter in the opening paragraph. So the additional examples here then, please accept my resume for consideration in filling versus throughout my career I have always developed and produced custom content. So what that second example is doing is really weaving in what is it that the client does, who have they done it for, and to what result happened. And all of that is very cleverly woven into just two statements that really represent the client and position them for the type of job they're going for. Here's another example. Throughout my decade-long career, I've developed and produced custom content. So you've got all these keywords woven in there. The second paragraph, and sometimes we can break this down into two different paragraphs, or we can have a paragraph and a bulleted list, but this is where you're going to generate interest. You want to identify what are the key requirements of the job that are specified in the job announcement, and then how can you represent those in the second paragraph of the resume or cover letter or in a bulleted list. So cite specific examples of what the client has to offer related to skills, abilities, and credentials. And then, don't just say it, but sell it. In other words, you don't just state, as you can see in my resume, I have a bachelor's degree, I have 10 years of experience, and I've managed sales teams. You have to say it in such a way that it illustrates results. And again, always write with rhythm and flow. So rather than just saying, I've got 20 years of cosmetology industry experience, and I've done training and management, and I'm a motivational team builder who accepts challenges head on, you weave them into sentences. You illustrate that with rhythm and flow, with examples. So the bolded words you see here are still representing what the employer is looking for, but it's not just a bulleted list of I do this and I have that. It's weaving it in, and it's speaking it from the perspective of what's important to the employer. And even with that whole paragraph, you're only seeing, the pronoun I is used 3 times, and it only once is it starting a sentence. Too many times we'll see a cover letter, and it's almost every sentence starts with I, me, or my. So stay away from that. It doesn't work for you. Another strategy then is to do it with a bulleted list. So, I've developed and honed the following. And then it's taking things off of the job lead, stating them back again, but illustrating them with an example that would resonate with the employer. So you've got to make sure that your example is something that would impress the employer. If, for example, this particular employer had nothing to do with at-risk youth programs, then what would they care that the award was for that particular program? So you've got to be able to weave it in and make it work for the employer. And then as you move on from there, you can, again, make this part of your second paragraph, or you could create a third, and this is where you create desire. This is where you really give the employer some sense that they need to pick up the phone and call this client, because this client is offering them something that distinguishes them from others. So this next example here is just a good way, to create desire. Not, I'm a people person who's done X, Y, Z, but, my innate nature as a people person shines through in successes I've achieved and aligns perfectly with your company philosophy. It's always helpful to, go to a company website, find out what their mission and values are, and then reflect that same mission and values in the language that you're having your client use. So, and then the other examples here I have of creating desire, you can combine the message into the one paragraph. You can include a bulleted list. You can insert graphics. You could have a table or a pie chart. And then a testimonial. The one resume I gave you for this Thomas Worthy, that testimonial quote in the middle of his resume is taken off of his LinkedIn profile. You could take them off of a LinkedIn profile. You could take them off of a performance review. Maybe the client received a thank you note from one of their customers, or maybe a coworker said something about them, or you could even integrate a quotation that is from the client that reflects their own personal beliefs and philosophy. So that's a good way to create desire that goes beyond this is what I have to offer and gives a little bit extra of catching attention. And like I say, the visual also can help a whole lot too if you show a pie chart or a bar graph that shows growth. And then, you look at your closing paragraph, and these are the three things that really need to be included. Ask for the interview, thank the reader for the time, and state what the next step is going to be. Now, I know for a long time we always said that your closing should be proactive. It should be, I will call you on Tuesday. There's a couple of problems with that. One is I've always told clients, don't say you're going to call unless you really are going to call. It may be a little too forward to say that I'm going to call. And if you are going to say, I'll call you on Tuesday, it's much better to say, I will call you to follow up on this correspondence and to see if you have any questions, than the very pushy, I will call you to schedule an interview. Because our clients do not have the authority to call employers and schedule interviews. So be very careful if you're using a proactive closing that it's not creating a disadvantage for your client or making your client come across as something pushy and aggressive. So either it's I'm going to call to follow up on the correspondence and, inquire about an interview, or I would like an interview. Please phone me, email me, whatever. These are the best times. This is the best way to reach me. If you can't reach me, leave a message. I will call you back. Anything to just let the employer know. And on this next slide, I've given you 5 examples of how to close a cover letter. So let me just stop there for a minute, and then I'll go over some of these little nuances of the different types of cover letter strategies to work in there. So let me... Okay, I'm still thinking probably Mark didn't get on the phone yet, so I'm working up from the bottom of the alphabet. Brenda?
Question. In this closing letter, how do you feel about asking what is your preference for me to follow up with you? Would you prefer that I call you or email you?
Well, but who's going to answer that? Oh, getting an echo.
Okay.
Yeah, if you ask a question, you're asking a question to the universe.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because, it's like, okay, so are you going to call me and tell me if it's okay if I should call you?
Mm-hmm.
I saw a strategy years ago where a client was enclosing self-addressed stamped postcards, and it had a little checkbox where the employer could check, I'm not interested, I will call you for an interview, or please call me with additional information.
Oh, my goodness.
So we can get clever. But, yeah, I wouldn't end with a question, because I would never put a question in the cover letter, because there's no way you're ever going to get an answer.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my stand on it. Tiffany Roberts?
I'm good, thank you.
Welcome. We're getting such a terrible echo. I don't know if that means people have to mute. Suzanne, I don't know if you got on the line. LJ, this is all new because you said you don't write cover letters. Do you have any questions, comments?
No, I'm definitely going to start reading them.
Read the ones I write because they're always very interesting. Okay, and then I had Sheila and Tiffany Bidding.
I'm here, Noreen. It's Sheila.
Did you get on, Tiffany?
Oh, this is Sheila.
Oh, I missed Ronnie again. I always miss you, Ronnie.
No, I'm fine.
I don't know why.
I'm fine.
Did you have anything, Ronnie?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Noreen, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, who's on there?
Oh, sorry. This is Sheila. I always...
You've already had your question. Would you do a *6 so we can get rid of this echo? Okay, somebody was talking. I'm just getting a lot of feedback. Okay. Doug?
Yeah, any tips on avoiding say in a second paragraph where you want to list accomplishments or particular skills that would be relevant to the employer?
Oh, my,
Any tips
I am
on
just
avoiding?
getting so much feedback. Would everybody do the *6 but Doug? So poor
Try again.
Doug can... Let's try it again.
I'm still getting it.
Okay. I may have to take questions afterward through email and phone calls. This echoing is a little bit wacky tonight. Let me put you on mute again, and we'll finish up here, and I'll give it one more shot at the end. Okay, so, there are those situations where the ad is asking for the salary requirements. Sometimes they're asking for the salary history. It's really important, first of all, to make sure you know what the question is. Do they want the history or do they want the requirements? How to address it is always a bit of an issue. I think it's a very unfair question, but so it's kind of a decision that you and your client need to make together. You can ignore the request. Just pretend you never even saw it. And you may run the risk of not getting a call, or maybe everything else is strong enough that the employer is going to overlook the fact that you ignored the request. You can be vague with your response. So you don't really answer it, but you at least acknowledge that you saw it. The second example that I put on there, having worked in the D.C. area, this was a little strategy that I worked out with one of my clients because he had worked in the D.C. area, and when he moved into Charlotte, South Carolina, or North Carolina, he recognized that salaries were going to be a whole lot lower there. And he knew that if he gave his salary history based on what he was earning in D.C., it was always going to work against him. So we just figured out a way to do it so that he wasn't really answering the question, but he was making the employer aware of why he wasn't answering the question. Again, it's not a fair question. You might try the range. I'm looking for a salary in the range of, or I'm looking at in a salary that is, at X thousands of dollars. Or you can be specific. I had a friend once who told me she was always direct with the employer because if they weren't going to pay her what she wanted, she didn't want to waste their time, and she didn't want them wasting hers. So, again, it depends on your client, what they're comfortable with, what strategy will be most effective for them, and then take it from there. And it may vary from position to position. So you just want to be a little strategic about how you handle that. The e-notes and the job board letters, when I say you want to follow the same principles as a formal business correspondence, I'm not talking about the format of the letter. I'm talking about that same attention, interest, desire, action. You always still want to keep that in mind, and you always want to keep in mind that this letter, even though it's going to be a lot shorter and it's not going to be as formal, still needs to focus very specifically on the employer's needs and what the client understands about those needs versus what the client wants. Part of the challenge is you really want to write tight. So if you're putting it on a job board or the message is appearing in the body of an email, a good rule of thumb is that the reader should not have to scroll in order to be able to read it. It should all fit there on the screen in front of them. And that's, regardless of how big their monitor is, you want the letters short and concise so that they're not scrolling from top to bottom to read it. They may have to scroll a little bit to see the signature line, but it's not something where they're going to print it out, and it's going to start printing out on several sheets of paper. The best idea for your client is create the letter and then save it as a plain text. That way, when the client copies and pastes it into the job board or into the body of the email message, the formatting will adjust to fit the platform that the employer is using. And that's specifically saving it without the line breaks. If you keep the line breaks in there, where you're actually hitting the hard return, then what's going to happen is you'll get those staggered scrolls where you'll have a line of text that goes all the way across, and then a couple of words, and then the next line of text. So save it in plain text. Do not keep the line breaks. When the client opens it up, it's going to look like it scrolls all the way off to the right side of the screen. But as soon as you copy and paste it into the body, everything's fine. And that strategy works well too if you're doing like a copy paste into a LinkedIn profile or anything else. So that's the best strategy if you're doing a job board or cover letter or email letter. And then here's an example. This is a very short one. If you were to go ahead and copy that and paste it into the body of your email, you're going to see that all the information is there, but we don't need to scroll. We've got a greeting. Obviously, we don't have a letterhead or an inside address because this is an email message or a job board message. But we still have the greeting. We still have a very attention-grabbing opening. For as long as I can remember, I've had a passion for keeping things well organized and operating efficiently, and then Post-it notes, date timers, databases. Not only is this, revealing what is important to this client and what they have to offer, but it's also weaving in some key words like databases and spreadsheets. And then the bulleted list is still there, but it's not, with bullets and symbols that aren't going to translate. It's just with a simple keyboard symbol, a plus sign, an equal sign, an asterisk, something that's on the keyboard. Because all of that fancy formatting, if you try to put it on a job board or in the body of an email, you're going to end up with something very different than what the client intended. It ends again with a request for an interview, a phone number, and the signature, the complimentary closing, and then the client's name. So all the information is there, and it still follows that same principles, marketing principles. And then the next couple of slides, well, this one is just giving you some tips when you're writing to recruiters. The biggest difference there is recruiters are looking for candidates that can fill the job openings they're trying to fill. And it's very important to them that they know, are you in the geography where I'm trying to fill the position? And does your salary align with the position I'm trying to fill? So although you probably wouldn't include that in a customary cover letter in response to a job opening, when you're writing to a recruiter, this is important information for them to have. And I hope that LJ is nodding her head saying, yes, I do need to know that. Don't waste my time if you're in Maryland and my job is in California. So calling that information out, as you can see, how they can be reached, the phone number, the email, all of that is included so the employer, the recruiter knows how to act. Networking letters, those are a little bit different because the purpose of that letter then is you're asking for an opportunity to talk with someone about any potential or current openings, or maybe about the company that they work for, to open up a conversation and to begin to, make connections that may lead them to the next position. So the focus is a little bit different here. You're still going to use the business correspondence. You're still going to apply the AIDA principles, but you want to get right to the point. Don't ramble on. Don't give them a whole lot of details about what the client has in terms of the litany of their background. Don't ask, for an interview for a job. Just, ask for insights, ask for direction, ask for information, and then consider the timing of the letter. When are you going to be sending it? When is the person going to be receiving it? So those are some general tips with the networking letter. I'm looking here at the samples that I gave you. The one sample, the Jill Job Seeker one, this was actually given to me by one of the participants in an earlier group of Writing Excellence. Susan Britton Wickham, who wrote the book Resume Magic, also taught a really dynamic webinar for the NRWA, and I believe it's still in the archives. She called it the 200-word cover letter. And the Jill Job Seeker one is an example that was written by one of the other participants in our program earlier in the year. And I wanted you to see that because it's a really nice little tight example, works very, very well for an e-note as well as a job board letter. But by just adding the letterhead, the inside address, formatting it according to the Gregg Reference Manual, it also can work very, very well for any kind of a formal cover letter. So very tight, very well written, and if you get a chance to do that webinar, I encourage you to do it. I thought it was great. So just in closing tonight then, what you want to do, this 4-step approach to reading the cover letter, take some time, print out the job announcement, get a pencil or a pen or a highlighter, and start, circling those keywords, identifying things that are not only in the job requirements, but also are in the duties and responsibilities. Clients have a really bad habit, I think, of looking at a job announcement and only reading the qualifications and requirements and saying, oh, yeah, I can do all of that. Well, then they write a cover letter that says, yeah, I can do all of that, or, gee, I'm a quick learner. I'd love to learn how to do all of that. But where the keywords are really essential is when you go in there and you look at the actual job duties and responsibilities. So many times when I'm reading a job announcement, what I'll do is I'll just, in the left or the right margin of the job announcement, I always print it out, and then in the margin I just start making a list of keywords. And that's going to take us back to our very first class when I told you to go through Candace's profile and highlight keywords. And then I even sent you a copy of the profile with keywords highlighted. Now you're going to be looking at the job announcement and you're going to be highlighting keywords. And then you're going to try to match the two as you develop the cover letter. So always take it apart, the first thing. Highlight those keywords. Be sure that they're the appropriate ones that are going to address what the employer needs. It's also a good idea, do a little bit of research about the employer. See if you can find out more about them. Try to, again, reflect the language that the employer is using, the type of message that they're representing in the job announcement, their company culture, and speak to that. Identify which words you want to feature in the cover letter, and then integrate them into a story, not just a litany of, I have this, and I have that, and I have this. So what you're seeing here on this slide is the words that I keyed in blue are actual key words that came out of the job announcement. So when you make a list like that and you've got this nice long list, then you want to sit down and figure out, okay, how do I weave this into a story? how do I weave this into statements that have rhythm and flow instead of just, here's everything that I have, or yes, I've done this and I've done that. So you really want to take some time to read these examples and see if you can't pick up on that same sort of tone. And then promise, deliver, say what your results have been, and then promise similar results to the employer. So some of the final thoughts, as I mentioned over and over, is write with rhythm and flow. Avoid all those cliches and overworked phrases. I am just really tired of reading about track records. We've read about track records over and over and over again. It kind of makes me laugh that everybody now is talking about their track record. I prefer to leave that for runners and athletes. So just stay away from those phrases. Proven experience, track record, senior seasoned employee. There's so many words in the English language that we don't need to just keep using the ones that everybody else is using. Ensure it's error-free. I said it with the resume, and I'll say it again with the cover letter. No one's asking you or the client to write these on the spot. There is no reason to be submitting documents that have not been proofread and have errors. And I'm going to acknowledge that this PowerPoint presentation was proofread by another person, and obviously it still has errors. So the message there is, don't just rely on your own proofreading. You may want to get a friend, and even then, you may want to proofread it again, particularly if what you're doing is submitting it for certification, because you've got the time to do it and do it correctly. And I am the first to admit that I send things out with errors, and I'm always upset when I see them later on and realize they have errors. I can tell you that once I submitted a resume to be published in one of Wendy and Louise's books, and I proofread. I submitted it. When the book came out, I was all excited. I looked up my resume. I saw it in there. It had an error in there. I thought, oh my, how did Wendy and Louise let that error go through? I looked at my original, and sure enough, the one that the client had been using all along had an error in it that all of us had missed, and now it was published in a book for the whole world to see. So we do all make mistakes, but please take the time to get your documents proofread. Customize it to each opportunity. I'm sure you tell your clients that. We aren't going to know that for certification purposes, that you may have copied things from another letter, but always tell your clients, customize it by matching it to the employer. Focus on the reader. Use the I, me, my sparingly. That doesn't mean never use it. I remember grading a test not too long ago, and the writer was so fearful of using I, me, and my that they just left it out of the letter altogether. So then the letter was all these short telegraphic writing statements that sounded absolutely ridiculous because no one speaks like that, and a cover letter needs to be written the way someone would speak. And then keep copies of every letter. You can repurpose content. As I was purging my files, getting ready for my move, I was pulling out old cover letters and going, oh, I really like that statement. I must have written that back in 1994. I think I'm going to use it again. So it doesn't mean you always have to reinvent the wheel, but, save copies of all of them. So that takes me to the end. The Gallery of Best Cover Letters by David Noble, I think, is probably one of the best cover letter resource books out there. And what I really like about it is the chapters, besides the fact that they're excellent letters, the chapters are broken up by individual occupations and industries. So it's a really great way to get some tips on a particular client that you're working with. And then the cover letter openers, I actually came across this blog. I'm not sure if the URL is still active. It was about a week ago when I checked it. But she had some really great examples there of opening lines. So you find one that, kind of resonates with you, and then you customize it to your individual client. Just looking over the ones that I got everybody's baseline resume, just some of the things that I noted. Questions in the cover letter, like I said, I advise against putting a question in there because you're not going to get the answer. Centering the letter on the page, that's an important thing. Paragraph lengths. Some of these I see there's like 5, 6, 7 lines in a paragraph, or there may only be 1 or 2 lines in a paragraph. So you want to balance that a little bit more. Quantified, I'm seeing some of these examples have some good quantified accomplishments in there. What we want to make sure is that those aren't the same words that were in the resume. Formatting, looks like most of these are formatted pretty well. The T-bar format, which I'm going to pull that up just because Ronnie was the only one who had submitted one like that, and I wanted you to just see what I was talking about. So, Ronnie, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to share your cover letter to the world. And if you do, you're going to have to quick send me a text message because I've got you muted and you can't say, please don't do that. But I just wanted you to see the format because I may not be describing it very well. But this is where Ronnie took off of the job announcement. This is what you are requiring or requesting, and this is what I have to offer related to that. This is an effective strategy. I probably would recommend that you not use it when you're applying for the certification, only because it is very difficult to write this without using a lot of personal pronouns, but it's a very effective strategy for job seekers. I find that when I'm working with a client who really struggles with writing cover letters, I give them this format. And I say, you're pretty much going to leave the first paragraph like it is. You'll just change the job title. And then you're just going to go in and you're going to change these 2 columns. And you're going to make a match the job announcement. And then you're going to leave your closing is going to be pretty much the same. So if you've never used this format, it's kind of a unique one. Another one that is pretty unique is if you had a chance to go to the convention last year, the NRWA convention, one of our members did a presentation on what he calls the human voice cover letter. And I believe that his recording is still available on the NRWA site. So there are a lot of different creative formats and strategies that you can use. I encourage you to use them. But when you're actually submitting for the NCRW, stick with the full block style formal business correspondence that integrates all the AIDA principles, and that will tell us that you know the basics. And once you know the basics, it's perfectly fine to get creative and step outside that window. So that concludes what I was going to cover tonight. I'm going to try one more time to unmute people. So this is it for tonight, guys. Yep, and I'm still getting a lot of echo. So I am not even going to try to run through questions. Let me just mute this again. I don't know why it does that sometimes, but yeah, rather than everybody listening to this echo and back talk, email me your questions. I am going to, in the morning, email out the job announcement for Candace. And then sometime tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to be unhooking my computer and monitors and packing them in a box and taking them to my new location. And from what I understand, Comcast won't be showing up until late on Monday. So if anybody has any questions or anything they need to share with me before Tuesday morning, get it in early tomorrow. And if you do contact me, I will have an opportunity to read email on my cell phone. I'll at least acknowledge that I got your message, but I'm not going to have my computer and I won't have any internet access. If I haven't given you feedback yet on last week's homework assignment, I'll try to get that out to the rest of you. And I know there's people that are listening to the call that have not submitted anything. You're not submitting it to satisfy me. You're submitting it so that I can give you feedback and you'll know what areas you need to work on. So it's really up to you whether you get your homework in, but it's those of you that have got it in, I really appreciate it because it helps me to see where you're all growing. And if there's resumes you're working on your own and you want to send those over to me, sometimes those are very revealing because I can see what you're able to do when you're actually having an opportunity to talk to the client instead of just having to work from a profile. So I appreciate everybody's time tonight and for hanging with me. And I'll be in touch by email, and I hope you all have a good weekend. And Doug, I heard it was going to be close to 80 up here in the Virginia area, so we're not going to envy you any longer. So good night, everybody. Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't do more questions, but I'll be in touch. Thanks a lot.